returned. I'm going to remind you that you're under oath. Mr. Durst is present, Mr. Chesnoff, Mr. Balian, and colleagues here. Mr. DeGuerin is here. All are present. You may proceed.
Thank you. With one stipulation we discussed, then I'm concluded. May I operate?
Yes.
Okay, so people 69, these phone records, telephone number 763-5022, these were for Mr. Durst's South Salem residence.
We so stipulate, Your Honor.
People 70, these records are for the Durst's 12 East 86th Street apartment. People 71, these records are for the Durst Riverside Drive apartment. And people 72, these records with the calls are for Van Dorn Realty, which was the name of the Durst organization at the time. So stipulated?
So stipulated.
Thank you. Court accepts the stipulation.
No further questions, Your Honor.
You may cross-examine the witness, Mr. Chesnoff.
Thank you, Your Honor. Special Agent Ross, first of all, thanks for your service with the anti-terrorism work. We all appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sir, do you remember being shown an exhibit, which was People 69, which was the phone number from the South Salem house?
Yes.
I'm going to put up on the screen a portion of that record. It was multiple pages. In 1 second. Or I can use the Elmo if it's easier.
It's actually a Wolf Vision document projector.
Oh, I'm sorry. Gosh. Wolf. Use the Wolf. My age, Your Honor. Forget it.
Do you want the here? Do you want the copy one?
Yeah. No, I want this one actually.
Oh. Just so it's not confusing, the copy he's using is just a different color, but it's the same record. It's a copy of the same record.
Thank you.
Sir, will you take a look at that? And that's part of the record in People 69, is that correct?
It's not on my screen.
There it is.
Here it is.
Sir, we've highlighted a number, which was 212-935-8964. Please remind ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a phone record from Mr. Durst's home in South Salem, is that correct?
Yes.
And on it, it has a list of calls numbered in a column, correct?
Correct.
And it also has the dates, correct?
Yes.
And so if we look at call number 9, that's a call to 212-935-8964, which is a number which the state and Mr. Durst agreed belonged to a woman named Susan Berman, correct? Understand?
I don't know that, but
If we tell you that.
yes.
Okay. Looking at this list of calls, are there any calls on the 31st or the morning of the 1st to Susan Berman's number?
No.
So the only call reflected on Mr. Durst's phone record from his South Salem residence to a number that's been identified as Susan Berman occurs on February 3rd, correct?
Yes.
There are no calls from Mr. Durst the afternoon, the evening of the 31st of January, are there?
No.
And there are no calls from Mr. Durst on the morning of February 1st to Susan Berman's number in New York City, are there?
No.
Now I want to kind of switch gears. Assume that Kathy Durst called her dean at her medical school, a gentleman named Cooperman, Dean Cooperman, and assume that you've had the access to the phone records, correct, of her phone at Riverside,
Yes. Go
which you have, correct?
ahead. Yes.
Okay. And during your testimony, you indicated that phone calls that would be between 3 and 5 minutes between a location in Manhattan to the Einstein Medical School in the Bronx would not appear on the bill if they didn't last beyond that duration, correct?
Correct.
So I'm going to ask you if Kathy Durst called from Manhattan from that phone number to the medical school and said the following: "Hello, Dean Cooperman.
Objection.
This is a hypothetical, Your Honor,
Relevance?
to show the time." Thank you. "Hello, Dean Cooperman. This is Kathy Durst. I need your help. I'm going to miss my rotation this morning because I'm vomiting, having diarrhea, and a terrible headache, and I'm sick. Would you please let them know? And by the way, other people are not having to make up their rotations. Will I? Also, Dean Cook told me that you might be calling me."
Objection.
To which Dr. Cooperman responds, "I'll take care of it. I hope you feel better." If that took less than 3 minutes, it wouldn't show up on her bill, would it?
Objection assumes facts, not an evidence. Improper hypothetical.
Well, sustain. The problem is the content. I don't think we have the content.
Well, the context's been testified to, Your Honor, by Dr. Cooperman, so it's an appropriate hypothetical. That's exactly what Dr. Cooperman testified
Okay,
the conversation was.
Mr. Bailey?
Certain parts of that were not in there. Like, I don't want to make up classes that others don't have to.
Well, that makes less time then, Your Honor. We'll withdraw that part.
Okay, do it again.
Thank you. "Hi, Dr. Cooperman. This is Kathy Durst. I'm not feeling well. I'm vomiting. I have diarrhea. I have a headache. I can't make my rotation. Would you please help me?" Dr. Cooperman: "Yes, I will. I hope you feel better. Oh, and by the way, Dr. Cooperman, I understand from Dean Cook that you might call me." Is that less than 3 minutes, Special Agent?
The way you said it was, yes.
Okay. And the way Dean Cooperman said it was also, but let me ask you this.
But wait,
I'll withdraw that.
Well, this to complete your hypothetical, so that wouldn't register here, being a local call less than 3 minutes.
All I could say is if whatever was said was under 3 minutes, it would not register.
Okay. Your next question?
Yes. Sir, you're from New York, correct?
Yes.
And you have what some people might call a distinctive New York accent, is that fair?
I don't think so, but
We're the ones with accents.
yes, exactly.
You would agree with me, Special Agent, in your years of work, that people from different regions speak differently, correct?
Correct.
So if Kathy Durst was from Queens, she might have an accent that was typical of somebody that grew up in either Long Island or Queens,
Objection.
correct?
Speculation, lack of foundation.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes.
Okay. And if Susan Berman grew up in Las Vegas and California mostly, her accent would be consistent with what people talk like in Las Vegas or California, correct?
It could, yes.
Okay. I have nothing further.
Redirect.
I assume in your life you've heard people copying accents or mimicking accents.
Yes.
This call, that hypothetical call that Mr. Chesnoff gave you, you have no knowledge of the exact contents of the conversation that occurred in 1982. Is that right?
I do not have any knowledge.
The hypothetical he gave you does not include the fact that perhaps the call was first made to a different dean and then had to go through a secretary and then transfer the call to another secretary and then another dean to pick up. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. You have no idea as you sit here today how long a call such as that would actually take?
No idea.
Okay. I'm assuming that if such a call was made from a payphone and not from Riverside Drive, that obviously wouldn't show up on the Riverside Drive records. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you said that if the call had a signal interrupted, that would be consistent with being made from a payphone. Is that right?
Yes.
And let's go to this call to Susan Berman to Susan Berman. That's on People 69 on February 3rd of 1982. I'm assuming that if somebody who lived at that residence called Susan Berman from a payphone on any particular date, that call would not show up on these records. Is that right?
That's correct.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Additional?
Yes, in your work on this, did anybody ask you to go back and check payphone records for areas close to South Salem or in Manhattan? Or were you strictly working off the records that have been provided to you?
Just working off the records that were provided.
And so as long as the conversation was connected, no matter how many times it took to connect, if it was less than 3 to 5 minutes, it would not appear on the bill, correct?
That's correct.
Which means that it was less than 3 to 5 minutes if it happened, correct? If Dr. Cooperman is accurate that a phone call came in from from Kathy Durst?
If there was a call under 3 to 5 minutes, it would not appear.
Thank you.
More?
Very briefly. You were just asked to look at the records that were obtained in 1982. Is that right?
Yes.
Do you have any way of going back and getting payphone records from 1982?
No,
Do they even exist anymore?
most likely not.
That would have had to been done by a detective who was interested in doing that in 1982, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Chesnoff, one more?
Yeah. The detective, you were a homicide detective in New York, correct?
Yes.
And people who work in homicide in New York are dedicated police officers, are they not?
We like to think so, yes.
And you worked there for how many years?
20 years in the New York City Police.
Right, and the police that worked in homicide in New York work diligently to solve their cases, do they not?
Yes.
Really?
He is now channeling Mr. Lewin.
Okay.
I mean, it's talking about diligent detectives. All right, that's fine.
Right, it's a funnel, okay? It gets
Yeah, that's
shorter
fine.
and
That's
shorter
fine.
and shorter. We're at the,
That's fine. We'll leave the diligence of the investigation. That's
Yeah.
another question for another person.
very good. So may this witness be excused?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor.
People-
Thank you. Thank you.
You're excused, thank you.
Thank you, Judge.
Do people have a live witness, or are we going to tape?
We have a live witness who's on tape. We have a conditional examination.
Very well, and is this the one, you may proceed with it.
Thank you. All right, may I mark the people are calling Karen Minutello by way of stipulated video. May I mark the DVD as People's, we're on 73,
Yes,
and the transcript is People's 73A.
yes.
Oh, okay. This one is much shorter. I think it's 45 minutes. Okay.
I have one. One more?
Ready, Your Honor?
Ready?
Please come stand in the witness stand. please raise your right hand? Please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly state that the testimony you're about to give in the trial something before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Yes. Please be seated. Pull your chair closer to the mic. Please state and spell your first and last name.
Karen, K-A-R-E-N, last name M-I-N-U-T-E-L-L-O, Karen Minutello.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I hate to ask you this, but I have to. What is your age?
70.
And back in 1982, what did you do for a living?
I was the property manager for 12 East 86th Street Associates on the premises of the building.
Okay, and what is 12 East 86th Street?
It was a rental building with 343 apartments.
340?
343 rental units and they're up to 360 if it was commercial space.
Okay, and as an apartment manager, or as the manager of the building, what were your duties at that time?
I collected the rent, I rented the apartments, I went to landlord-tenant court, I saw all the repairs in the building, I handled all the porters and maintenance staff, and oversaw the super's responsibilities, and was the direct link with all things to the landlord, which was the owner of the property.
Okay, and is it fair to say that if there was an issue, any issue with this building or the tenants, that you would be the one to personally handle it?
Yes, absolutely.
And when did you start your job as a manager of that particular apartment?
I started in January 1977.
And when how long did you keep that position for?
I stayed until June of 1991.
Now, you seem to have a fairly good recollection of dates. In fact, you specified what month you started and what month you ended. Do you consider yourself to have a fairly good memory of numbers and dates?
Yeah, I do. My family
Okay.
credits me for keeping up the dates in my pool, my brain.
Okay. I wish I had your memory. Back in 1982, did you have a tenant by the name of Robert Durst?
Yes.
And what was the living situation for Mr. Durst? Did he live with anybody else? What unit was he in?
He was in apartment 1520, which was on the 15th floor. It was a 2-bedroom apartment, and he lived with his wife, Kathleen.
And you remember the unit number?
1520.
And did you have interactions with either Robert Durst or Kathy Durst while you were managing the apartment there?
Yes, I had interaction with all the tenants.
And what type of interactions did you have with either Robert Durst or Kathy Durst?
I would be in the hallway, I would be in the building, walk around the building. I knew all the people who lived, what apartment they were in. I saw them in the hallways. I said hello, good morning. I would accept packages for the tenants, and if it was a valuable package, I'd keep it in my office to keep it safe.
And it sounds like from what you're saying, as the manager, you were on site to handle these things at the building personally.
Yes.
And what were your hours as a building manager back in 1982?
I worked 9 to 5, Monday to Friday.
And that means that from those hours, generally from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., you would be on site at the building?
Yes, Tuesday afternoons I would go to the main office and I would take the rents and record them for the bookkeeper. Computers were primitive, so we only had them at the main office.
Okay, and if something occurred outside the hours of 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., did you live at the building or did you live somewhere else?
No, I live on and still live on Long Island.
Now, I have a photograph. It's a single black and white photograph, and I'll show counsel. Now I can have that marked for identification next in order. People's 5?
Yeah.
Can you see that photograph that's marked as People's 5?
Yes,
Okay. Do you recognize anybody in that photograph?
yes, Robert Durst is on the left and Kathy Durst is on the right.
On the right, you mean on the far right?
Yes,
And there's somebody in between them?
I didn't know her.
Okay.
Did not know her.
So, your understanding at the time in 1982 was that Robert Durst and his wife Kathy Durst lived in that 2-bedroom apartment in Unit 1520.
Yes,
Now, did you have any dealings with Robert Durst where you had to act as an apartment manager for any things that he's done or any things that he did? Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, were there any incidents involving Robert Durst that you had to tend to?
well, it was when the compactor got jammed up.
Okay, I'll get back to that in a second about the compactor. Are there any other incidents involving Robert Durst that you were aware of, that people came to you?
Yes,
Now, let me back up for a second. So you're aware of incidents involving Robert Durst, not the compact issue,
right.
but other issues involving Robert Durst while you're the manager of the building, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, do you rely on some of the employees that work for you to tell you what's going on with the building?
Yes,
Okay, and do you rely on what those people tell you in order to decide how to take action or what action to take, if any?
yes,
And were there incidents involving Robert Durst that some of your employees had told you about?
yes, it was about the compactor, yes.
So, I want to ask you, did you have regular contact with either Robert Durst or Kathy Durst? Did you talk to them over the phone or in person, anything like that, regularly?
I spoke with Kathy a few times.
Okay. And how were what was the nature of those conversations? Was it like a hi, how are you kind of conversation, or?
Yes, in passing.
Passing.
I would receive phone calls, as I did with all the tenants.
Okay. Is there one phone call in particular that has stuck in your memory all these years?
Yes,
Okay. Now, before I get to that phone call, were you managing the apartment when you became aware that Kathy Durst had disappeared?
yes.
And how was it that you became aware that Kathy Durst had disappeared?
From her sister and a friend, also tenants in the building.
And do you recall what year it was when you first learned that Kathy Durst had disappeared?
Late January 1982.
Okay. And now I'm going to get back to that phone call. So you had a phone call with Kathy Durst that stuck in your memory?
Yes,
Okay. Now, first of all, when did this phone call, when did you receive this phone call?
it was about a week or two before she disappeared. It was January 25th, 1982.
You did say you were good with dates. Now, was it a phone call where Kathy had called you, or was it a phone call where you had called Kathy?
Kathy called me.
And what was the nature of this particular phone call?
It was significant because she was asking if there was a vacant apartment in the building. And she was hesitant when I was asking more questions.
Okay. So, can you tell me, what did you discuss with Kathy Durst in this phone call?
Well, I told her that I didn't have an apartment at the moment.
Well, let's back up for a second. What was she asking you first?
She was asking me for another apartment in the building. Because she
Because she what?
because she didn't want to live with Robert anymore.
So she indicated that she wanted to look for another apartment. That's an apartment in the building.
Yes,
That's different than the one that she was living.
yes,
And she indicated to you that she wanted to do that because she didn't want to live with Robert Durst anymore.
right.
And was she very forthcoming about that information that she didn't want to live with Robert Durst anymore?
She was hesitant at first.
And when you say she was hesitant, can you describe what you mean?
She was hesitant, she didn't just come out and blurt out why. But then she did say she needed to get away from me.
Did she indicate to you why she wanted to get away from Robert Durst?
Yeah, she was afraid of me.
What was her demeanor during this phone call? Do you remember?
Hesitant, quiet, not speaking in complete, clear sentences. She just was hesitant in her explanation.
And was she also hesitant in having you reveal any of this information to anybody else?
Yes, she didn't want me to say anything.
And what was it about? What did she say to you that conveyed that message to you?
She said, this is just between you and me. It's just, she needed an apartment and I didn't have anything, so I couldn't help her.
Is that something that she stated multiple times to you? That she didn't want anybody else to know?
I don't recall.
Now, aside from the request to look for another apartment, did she make another request to you in that same phone call?
She wanted to know whether she could have a roommate.
And can you tell me what she said about that?
She asked if she could have a roommate in the apartment she's in with her, and to help with the rent and also to have someone else there with her.
Did she indicate to you why, alternatively, if she couldn't get an apartment, why she wanted to live with somebody else?
Because she didn't want to be by herself with anything.
I'm sorry.
For money to help her pay, and she wanted someone there for her to be with her, to protect her.
What did she say to you about that specifically? What do you remember?
She was looking for alternatives when I didn't have another apartment for her.
Okay. So, number one, she either wanted an apartment, a vacant apartment that she can move into. Is that right?
Yes.
Or alternatively, if you didn't have a vacant apartment, she asked you if she can have a roommate in her current apartment.
Yes.
Did she indicate to you at that time that she was living with anybody else in that apartment?
Well, she was living with her husband.
And she indicated to you in that phone call that she wanted to have a roommate because she didn't want to live by herself.
Because she was more or less, she wanted somebody else there, like I said, to help her pay for the rent. She would rather have somebody else there with her.
All right, it's time for our afternoon break. And we're returning at 1:30 p.m. Where we will not converse with any other witness about your testimony. Welcome back in the session. We'll versus from the room. So you remain under oath, and you may resume your examination of the witness, Mr. Minero.
Thank you. Good afternoon now, Ms. Minero. So during the break, you had come up to me and you had mentioned that you had recalled the name of another doorman that had worked back in 1982. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what is the name that you recall?
George.
George. Do you recall last name? And was George one of the doormen that had informed you about Robert Durst taking tenants' bikes?
Yes.
Now, going back to the phone call that you received from Kathleen Durst on January 25th, 1982, I think the last thing that we talked about is we started to get into portion of that call where you guys indicated she said she wanted to see if she can get permission to have a roommate. Is that correct?
Yes.
So can you please describe again what that portion of the call was about? What did she say to you about that?
She asked if it was a possibility, but she didn't elaborate with who or when or what, and I didn't talk to her after
Okay,
that.
and the way that this conversation went, did she indicate to you that that was an alternative if there was no apartments available for her to move into?
Yes,
So the first priority for her during this call was to find a vacant apartment in that building.
yes,
And if that didn't work out, she wanted to see if she can have a roommate.
yes,
And the first part where she said that she wanted to get another apartment unit within that building, you indicated that she said that she wanted to get away from Robert Durst.
yes.
Did she indicate any type of fear that she had of
Yeah.
Robert Durst?
Yes.
How did she do that?
She was, I could tell by her demeanor, how she was talking to me and how she was hesitating in her speaking to me, that she was a little hesitant and fearful about what she wanted, her reasons. But then I did get from her that she said, I need to get away from her.
And you indicated earlier that this was a call that occurred on January 25th, 1982, and you already indicated that was approximately within 2 weeks when you discovered that Kathy was missing.
Yes,
And you also indicated earlier on that this call stuck in your memory. Is that right?
yes, it did.
Why?
Okay, because when I learned that she was missing, I jotted down notes of that conversation, so I would have it written down.
Okay, so as soon as you thought or as soon as you became aware that Kathy Durst was missing, I understand you thought that this conversation that you had on January 25th, 1982 was important.
Was relevant, was important, and the information could be helpful.
Okay, and the information you said you took note of the details of this phone call.
Yes,
And where did you take those notes?
I wrote them down on pad of paper. I had a file on every tenant, and I wrote it down and I put it in her tenant file.
And as you sit here today, do you know what happened with those notes?
The files were eventually purged after I didn't work there any longer. They were thrown out.
So the files including the notes that you kept on Kathy Durst's file?
Yes.
Now, you also earlier in your testimony explained and mentioned people by the name of Mary and also Geraldine, I believe.
Yes.
Are those people familiar to you?
Yes.
Okay, let's start with Mary. And you're speaking of Mary Hughes?
Yes.
How do you know Mary Hughes?
She was a tenant. Her and her husband were a tenant in the building. She worked for Geraldine McInerney. So they were in the building all the time. I saw them all the time. I spoke to them all the time. So I was very aware of the ongoing situation.
Okay. And when you spoke to them all the time, this would be around the time frame of 1982 during Kathy's disappearance?
Yes.
Was Geraldine McInerney also a tenant of that building?
Yes.
So Mary and Geraldine and Kathy all lived in the same building that you managed?
Yes.
And aside from speaking with Mary and Geraldine, did you develop sort of like a friendship with them, or?
I did. I always wanted to keep the business side and the friendship side separate. But they did invite me out for lunch one Christmas, and I thought that would be fine. And so not compromising my position as the building manager, it did develop a nice friendship.
And to clarify, you were aware that Mary Hughes was related to Kathy?
Oh, I know, it's her sister.
Now, I want to speak about an incident about a clogged trash compactor. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Yes.
Okay, can you please tell me what that incident is about, when it happened?
The supers and the porter. The porters were the men that did the cleanup of the building, and one of their jobs was to empty the compactor chute. This was prior to separating recyclables.
Okay.
And the superintendent, Carlos Hernandez, came up to my office and said the compactors.
Okay, so Carlos Hernandez, who's the superintendent,
Right.
Came and told you what?
They told me that the compactor was all jammed up, so it's my job would be to call into the repairman. And as I did with any repair, I went and got up out of my office and went and looked at what the situation was. If it was a leak or anything like that.
Okay.
So I went down into the basement, into the compactor room, and the porters were pulling out clothes, books, personal possessions that were jamming up and broke the machine.
And the porters pulling out these items from the trash compactor, that's something that you saw with your own eyes?
Yes.
And aside from clothing, you said, and books, can you tell me what else that you saw or that you remember seeing?
There was notebooks, there was, personal items, hair dryers, makeup, clothing.
Okay. And did you make an attempt to try to identify whose belongings those might have been in the trash compactor?
Yeah, I picked up a book.
Okay. What type of book?
I think it was a notebook or a textbook.
Okay. And what did that tell you?
That had Kathy's name in it.
Kathy Durst?
Yes.
Okay. Approximately when was it that Carlos Hernandez came and told you that the trash compactor was clogged in this particular incident?
A date?
Approximately when relative to Kathy Durst's disappearance?
Days.
Days?
That's after?
Yeah.
Days after.
Days after?
Days after.
Okay. And now, going back to some of the duties that you had as an apartment manager. Now, for example, this trash compactor situation, when an employee tells you that the trash compactor is clogged, you indicated in this instance that you went personally to go look to see what the problem was. Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay. Is that something that you do pretty much in every instance where there's a problem that needs your attention?
Yes. If it was a pipe break or a leak or anything I would go and check and see what needed to be done. Let the tenant know if it was something in their apartment or that we had to go in. Call in the necessary people for the repair. And I always took it as a learning opportunity.
Did you find out at some point who it was that was clogging the trash compactor?
Because it was items from the Durst apartment, I sent the order up to the 15th floor to see if stuff was still being put down in the chute.
Okay, and did that porter, do you remember who that porter was?
No.
And do you recall that porter, after you told him to do these things, did that porter come back and report to you?
I don't remember specifically if it coincided, but the stuff was up on the 15th floor.
No, I'm sorry, can you explain?
The compactor room was on the 15th floor.
The compactor room?
Each floor had a compactor chute that would go down to the basement.
Okay.
And he went up there and saw that the stuff was from there. I don't remember if he came and talked to me or not afterwards.
And as you sit here today, how sure are you that the items that were jamming the compactor were Kathy Durst items?
100%.
And is it fair to say, earlier we stated that your hours were 9 a.m. to 5 p.m.?
Yes,
And so is it fair to say that the jamming of this trash compactor occurred sometime within your working hours?
yes,
And that's because you were present at the site to be able to observe this?
yes.
Okay, and also, how sure are you that this incident regarding the trash compactor happened after you were made aware of Kathy Durst's disappearance?
I'm 100% sure, and I remember I added that to my notes.
Okay. And so now, you have the phone call from Kathy Durst on January 25th, 1982, and you have the trash compactor situation, which you said happened days after Kathy's disappearance.
Right.
Was the trash compactor being filled with Kathy Durst's personal belongings, was that a significant event for you, or significant incident for you?
Yes.
Why was it significant?
I'd never observed that before. When people threw out trash, not folding books and those items aren't supposed to go down the compactor. It's machinery packs precious things.
Okay, well, is it fair to say that during your many years as a building manager that you've dealt with jammed compactors before?
This is the only one I remember that was significant.
And why is it that you remember this one over anyone, over any other incident?
I mean, who does that?
Does what?
Whose wife, whose loved one is missing and they throw out their stuff?
Excuse me 1 second. Now, you mentioned at the time, Carlos Hernandez was the superintendent that informed you of this jammed compactor?
Yes.
And is the name Nelson Mendez also someone that you know?
Yes.
And how do you know Mr. Mendez?
He was a maintenance worker, and he worked, I think he went on to replace Carlos as the superintendent.
Okay. So Nelson Mendez was somebody who worked for you back in 1982 as well?
Yes.
And at the time he was a maintenance worker?
Yes.
Now, do you have any recollection of Robert Durst trying to sublease the apartment at or around the time of Kathy's disappearance?
Yes.
Okay, what recollection do you have?
I received a letter.
Okay, and who was the letter from?
Robert Durst,
Okay, and what did the letter state?
that he was interested in subleasing the apartment.
Now, I have a 2-page letter, Your Honor, that I'd like marked for identification. This one is People 6.
Yes.
May I approach the witness?
Yes.
Now, I'm going to show you the 2-page document which we just had identified as People 6. Can you take a look at that and tell me if you recognize both of those pages?
Yes.
Okay, and how do you recognize People 6?
Because it was me that he addressed it to, and it was a request to sublet the apartment, and then it's my signature.
Okay, and this is a letter that's dated February 4th, 1982?
Yes.
Okay, and you indicated that it's addressed to you. The name on this letter says Miss Karen Hogan.
Yes. That was my first marriage last name.
Okay. And just going to page 2 of People 6, there's a signature which you indicated was yours. That's the signature that signed Karen E. Hogan?
Yes.
And that signature indicates that you were in receipt of this particular letter, correct?
Yes.
Do you recall, from your memory today, if Mr. Durst ultimately sublet that apartment after Kathy Durst's disappearance?
No.
You know what happened to the apartment?
It was rented out to another. He left and it was rented out to another separate person.
Okay. Do you recall approximately when it was that he left that apartment?
No. But I do remember the name of the person that moved in after him.
Okay. Now, going back to the trash compactor incident, you indicated that you took notes of the phone conversation that you had with Kathy Durst back in January. Did you take notes of this compactor incident as well?
Yes, because I knew that she was missing, and I thought the two could be connected, so I wrote it down, everything that transpired that day, just so I'd have it, the timeline and how things happened.
And the notes regarding this compactor incident, did you put those also in Kathy Durst's tenant file?
Yes, I put it on the same paper.
Okay, which was subsequently purged?
Yes.
Now, so at this point you have the phone call from Kathy Durst and you have the trash chute incident shortly after Kathy's disappearance. Did you feel like those incidents were kind of important and relevant to the investigation into Kathy Durst's disappearance?
I thought it was a significant happening, and I thought it was important to document.
Okay, but in 1982, is it fair to say that you were not contacted by any police, or you didn't speak to any police about this incident?
No.
And in fact, is it fair to say that the first time that you spoke with police about these incidents was in 2001?
Yes.
Now, why is it that you felt like you had important information, but you did not go to the police yourself to let them know about what you knew?
I expected them to come and question me, so I thought what I had to say was important. I was not yet married to Albert Minutello, but we lived together, and he said to me, they'll come to you if they need you.
Okay, and what did Albert Minutello do for a living back in 1982?
He was retired on New York City Police.
And he was then living with you, but subsequently became your husband at some point later?
Yes.
Okay, and it was Albert Minutello that told you, don't go to the police?
Well, he didn't tell me not to go to them. He just said to me, if they need you, they'll come to you. And I always expected them to, and they never did.
And Albert Minutello, he's currently deceased, correct?
Yes.
And so at that point, did you choose to listen to your future husband, Albert Minutello, and took his advice?
Yes, and I also knew that Mary and Geraldine were pursuing and speaking to the police and trying to get the police to listen to them. And I thought, if they're not going to listen to what they have to say, why would they listen to what I have to say?
I see. Excuse me, can I have one more? Yeah. All right, no further questions of this witness.
Cross-examination.
What was your husband's Mr. Minutello's assignment in the NYPD?
He was just patrolman.
Okay, did he know Mike Struck? Do you know?
No.
You don't know, or?
No, he did not. He worked in Brooklyn, out of Brooklyn.
But you know who Mike Struck is?
I heard it on the news.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, that's all.
Redirect? Anything else?
No.
The witness be excused?
Yes, sir.
The witness is excused. Thank you.
The conclusion of the video, Your Honor. We have a subsequent video we could start. It's
We need to mark the exhibits from this video. Mr. Bailey, do you want to
Yes.
do that?
Thank you, Your Honor. I have the exhibit correlation sheet. Can we call it that?
Yes.
We mark this as People's 73B. I have a photograph that was referenced in the video as People's 5. May I mark this as People's 73C?
Yes.
I have a 2-page document dated February 4th, 1982, signed by a Robert Durst. This is referenced in the video as People's 6. May I mark this as People's 73D?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Would the court like to start the break or start a video?
Did you say break?
I'm sorry.
So I think that's, how long is this next video?
How long is it?
I don't recall. I believe it's over. Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's at least 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Let's get started with our break, and we'll come back at 1:30. Do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case, and we'll see you at 1:30. Thank you.
Just to supplement the record, it's another witness who touches on the failure of the New York police to contact her, but our position, as you know, Your Honor, is that's because they had identified her in the city at that point in time. I just put that in the record. To further the original request we made for evidence of the identification of from the witnesses of her being in New York City after the date in question.
It's Eddie Lopez evidence, Your Honor.
Wait, what?
But Eddie Lopez saw her on the early morning hours of February 1st.
She didn't say anything about Eddie Lopez.
So she was not contacted, and the defense is suggesting the reason she wasn't contacted was because of these things that are mentioned in the evidence. I've excluded because it's unreliable hearsay. But perhaps you would, Mr. Bailey, and I wonder if, well, first of all, again, in case it's not clear, if there is a reasonable doubt as to whether or not Mr. Durst killed Kathy Durst, the people could concede that. I mean, the point is whether or not he's a suspect, rightly or wrongly accused, and she's a witness to this imbroglio he faced. But secondly, the people have suggested to me these various accounts, and I take them as offers of proof that these witnesses are discredited. Perhaps a thorough accounting of this discrediting ought to be part of our record, just so that it's clear that, in utilizing my discretion, I'm in part considering what the people would present. I'm just suggesting that.
Yes, you're talking about with respect to the
This hearsay, which I've excluded because it's irresolvable. It's hearsay. There's just no exception. But
Certainly.
the people wish to. I mean, the defense continues to ask that this hearsay be presented, even though, and every time there's some reference to a police failure to investigate this case, they point to this material, which the people have suggested is a red herring. But, okay, something else?
No, I think the court sees the issue. The people continue to criticize Strzok's investigation when Strzok, in fact, personally and other detectives interviewed Eddie Lopez, put him through the ringer, hypnotized him, and used his, I'm not supposed to use the P word, but
well, that's kind of silly too. That rule is that the evidence can't be admitted of such procedure.
I understand that.
But as we've told you, Your Honor, we're not trying to admit that for any other purpose than your evidentiary ruling that it is not discredited. The court can take notice the police used an investigative tool of doing that with him, and he successfully passed it, which defeats this constant harangue that we hear that somehow it wasn't credible.
Right.
It was always credible, and we've briefed this for you, Your Honor. We've told you why it was credible.
Yeah. No, I don't agree it's credible. But in any event,
There's evidence of Eddie Lopez's alcohol problems. The court heard that through Rafael Prado, who testified at a conditional examination. There was evidence of when Eddie Lopez did or didn't show up for work, and could have seen things. You heard that from Rafael Prado at the conditional examination. There was testimony Rafael Prado of his relationship with Eddie Lopez and how Eddie Lopez didn't say anything to him, as one would expect. You heard that. There's evidence of Eddie Lopez being interviewed by other detectives and investigators post-2000 and 2001, where he recanted and changed his story. There's all kinds of stuff, Your Honor.
right. I mean, inferentially also, it would appear to be fabricated.
Let me answer that. Let me answer that right when it's in the record. Yes, there is contradictory evidence to Eddie Lopez, but that's a jury issue. It should be a jury issue. It's not.
Not in this context, because here reliability may bear upon the admission of something otherwise excluded as hearsay.
But Your Honor,
And by the way, well, let me say also, these things that you complain about, you stipulated to and have waived your objection. You did it for some strategic purpose. So.
well, we stipulated to the conditionals, Your Honor, after you had told us that you weren't going to allow this in. And the most important thing to focus on here, Your Honor, is there was an investigation. It occurred. It's the reason why the police didn't do certain things. That's a fact. Whether they were flawed in their investigation, whether years later what they knew at the time is somehow impeached, doesn't impact the fact that at the time the investigation was occurring, these seasoned police officers in New York City believed that she was in the city. And that's a fact, Your Honor. That's
okay. So, but I'm still going to limit us to the relevant facts, and I don't find that really is an out. I mean,
well, then, but it is in the context.
It's remote. It's remote to the issue of whether or not Mr. Durst is a suspect. This goes to whether or not this is hearsay regarding whether or not if he were put on trial for this, could this raise a reasonable doubt as his guilt as to the killing of Kathy Durst, which is not an element in this case, not in the special circumstance, not in the charged offense, but only as a matter of motive.
Then why have we been listening to a prosecution of him for murder, of Kathy Durst, which the court asked Mr. Bailey and perhaps, I mean, that, unfortunately, Your Honor, we didn't choose to present this case the way they chose to prove it. All they had to do was establish that at some point in time, as you've said, he was a suspect. Instead, they have spent all of their time trying to prove that he actually killed her, and Mr. Lewin must have said that 5 times. He killed her in the house, he killed her in the house, he killed her in the house. And we're just trying to show this jury that they're not as inept at that time as they're trying to suggest they are. And in fact, she may have been in New York City, she may have had a gentleman call her, she may have been killed by somebody else, and we wouldn't be doing it if they weren't trying to prove over and over again that Bob killed her.
Okay, but
and that the police investigation was flawed. That's their theory, that the police investigation was flawed, and this goes directly to that.
yes, unfortunately, there is this prohibition against hearsay. So, of course, you were only making a record. You weren't actually relitigating this. So, all right, thank you. Recess.
Before council leaves, Your Honor,
Yes?
we were missing people 69, the original. I think he had it last for.
Okay.
I'll help him find it.
All right, thank you. Recess.
I don't think I have it.